Before we get started one more time, I just want to make sure that our presenter, Kevin Elliott, that you're able to speak.
I'm speaking. Can you hear me?
Perfect. We can. You sound loud and clear. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. As we do that, I'm going to read you guys out some statistics. It looks like we have about 16% of you joining us from the Northeast, about 16% from the Southeast, 37% from the Midwest, about 28% from the West, and about 2% from other regions. As always, we have most of you joining us by yourself, about 76% watching on your individual computer, but we do have several of you joining us in groups as well. We have about 16% of you in a group of 2 to 3 people, about 2% in groups of 4 to 5 people, and about 2% of you having a big old party with about 10 or more in your room. So I'll give you guys some instructions here in a minute about how to make sure we have the correct registration information for all of you. And then as far as organizations go, we have about 10% of you joining us from federal DOT, about 28% from state DOT, 14% of local transportation departments, about 4% of you from state highway safety offices, 10% of you joining us from other state agencies. We have about, 14% of you joining us from educational institutions, 14% consultants, and about 4% from other. And then we also have the majority of you, about 75% of you from computer only, and then about 25% of you joining us both on the computer and the phone. If you do have any audio issues today, for those of you who are joining us on the computer only, we would ask you to call in. The phone number is located in the top left-hand side of your screen, and again, that would just be if you have audio issues only. You may also use the chat pod at any time to contact the WTI staff members who can also help you with any issues that you may run into during today's presentation. I'm going to move us over to our main PowerPoint today, and you'll notice the screen changes just a bit. Okay, just a few more logistics for you guys. The duration of today's webinar is an hour and a half. It is being recorded so that it can be archived on the Safety Center's website. It should be there in a few days. For quality of the recording, we have muted everybody's phone lines. Because of this, we would ask you to put any questions you have into the chat pod, which you'll see is over in the left-hand side. You may put those in there at any time. Our presenter today is going to answer those on the fly as he goes through stuff. He would like this to be a very interactive session. We will also have at least 3 breaks for question and answer sections as well. When we do get to those, I'll also remind you about the chat pod, and any questions that have not already been addressed while he was presenting, we will read off, and Kevin will present them at that, or answer them at that time. So that you know as well, if you'd like to maximize the presentation on your screen, up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see 4 arrows that press outward. That will maximize your screen and get rid of all of the information along the left and bottom that you're currently seeing. If you are listening on your phone, we would also ask you to please mute your computer screen, otherwise you may hear some feedback throughout today's presentation. I also want to point out the handout pod in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. In that you will find a PDF of today's presentation. You'll find 2 graphics that will be gone over by Kevin, as well as the communications brochure that he'll go over with you at the end of today's presentation. We'll also have 2 follow-up surveys that will go out after today's presentation. The very first one, I'm providing the survey link on your screen right now. It will also be available in that PDF in the handout section. We like to provide you with the link just because sometimes it ends up in your junk mailbox. That survey link is the one that will allow you to check whether or not you would like CEUs or certificates of completion for today's webinar. The CEUs form will be sent out with that certificate, and you will return that CEU form to continuinged@montana.edu and not the Safety Center. Our CEUs are handled by a different department at Montana State University. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks for us to create these certificates, as we have upwards of 100, 150 of you now requesting them for each of our webinars, and they are manually created and manually emailed out. So it will take a couple weeks for that, and we do leave the surveys open for 2 weeks. You'll see a reminder that comes out as well to fill that out. On your screen right now, the top left-hand side, you'll see what the course registration form looks like to request those CEUs. They are offered to you for free. The Safety Center does pay for those. And then in the bottom right-hand corner is what a verification of completion form would look like. You can request these at any time of the continuing ed at Montana State University, and they'll provide you with a list of all of the courses that you have requested CEUs for. This includes any of our summits that we've had as well. Today's webinar is being hosted by the National LTAP and TTAP Association Safety Committee, so we thank them for co-hosting with us today. And today's presenter is Kevin Elliott from ARA. Kevin is a senior marketing specialist at the Applied Research Associates, Inc. He manages creative outreach projects for clients, including the Federal Highway Administration, the Florida Department of Transportation, the U.S. Air Force, and the National Institute for Standards and Technology, among others. He is also an adjunct communications professor at Florida State University, Panama City. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us today. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
The goal of today's webinar, once you've completed this webinar, you will have quick tips for marketing safety with examples, understand another way to think about your elevator speech, and have a handy communication tool. The learning outcomes to help you achieve this goal are to describe several practical tips for better communication, to define the sales funnel and how it works in communication, to write 3 teasers to describe your work to others, and to use a communication brief to plan communication activities. Before we do get started, we're gonna start with one poll break. So our first questions to all of you is, have you seen this presentation before? It has been given at both the Safety Summit in December and a few weeks ago at the NACE annual meeting. And then if you have seen this presentation before and you've been able to try some of the techniques you learned, what were the results? This is the box over to the right-hand side. It is an open-ended response box for you to go ahead and put any answers in. And then the third question is, what is your comfort level with marketing and outreach? Extremely comfortable, I'm a marketing fool. Moderately comfortable, interested but nervous, uncomfortable but I'll survive, and scared to death. So please take a few minutes and fill those out for us. Okay, and at this point in time, it does look like most people have responded to at least the first one. So I'm going to go ahead and broadcast these results for you, Kevin. Okay, and Kevin, at this time you should be able to see the results of the polls and address them.
Yep. Yeah, I see them. Yeah, it looks like almost everyone is brand new to the presentation, so that's cool. And we have some folks who are actually pretty okay with marketing. And when I do this presentation, it usually ranges pretty well. I just want to know where you all stand. So that's good. I'm talking to some folks who are kind of involved with this already. That's good.
Okay, perfect.
No marketing fools. Maybe 1 or 2. Let's see if we can make y'all marketing fools.
Okay, I've moved us back over to the presentation, Kevin. So at this time, you should be able to change the slides.
Okay. Well, very good. Thank you all for taking the time today, everybody. I saw in the list of folks there, I see a few friends in there and lots of folks I don't know. So happy to meet you. Hopefully I'll meet you one day in person. As Jamie said, I work with technical folks all the time and help them market and communicate their offerings and their programs better. It's a tough job. It's an interesting job because you do such amazing work out there that impacts people's lives But a lot of times it's hard to communicate the value of that or exactly how that works. And you're being pulled in so many different directions that what I want to do with this presentation is give you some tips at 3 different levels. One is on the personal level. So we're gonna rethink the elevator speech or the whole concept of it. So when you're talking to people and explaining, we're going to help you out with that, I think, a little bit better. The other is I want to give you just some basic practical tips that you can use in just about every one of your communication outreach efforts, and describe a little bit about how our brains work, and maybe pull the curtain back a little bit on how we are persuaded to do things and how we make choices, and that will give you some practical tool to help you then frame your communications a little bit better. And then I'm going to give you a takeaway, and it's down there in that handout, the communications brief, which is a one-page little handy tool that will help you plan your overall efforts. And so I'm trying to give you some value on those 3 levels before we go. But the first 2 sections are related to these practical tips, and then also how the sales funnel. You may have heard that term, you may not. I'm going to explain it to you. So let's jump in. Here are the marketing tips that I'm going to give you, break them down for you, that will instantly help your communications be better and more effective. So I'm going to explain each one of these, and then I'll give you an example that we can all look at and you can take with you. First one is to start with why. You may have heard of this. This is a book. Oh, and as Jamie mentioned, I'm also a college professor, and so I can't help myself. I have to give you a reading list. And so as we go along through here, I will give you some names of books where I got a lot of these ideas that were very, very helpful to me. So start with why is one. Visualize is another tip. Using analogies is a super powerful way to communicate, especially technical information to people who are not technical. Asking questions, and then we're going to get emotional, people. Emotion is an incredibly powerful communication tool. I'll show you how to use it and show you a really neat example from Clackamas County, Oregon. Okay, so start with why. You might have heard of this book, Start With Why by Simon Sinek. It started as a very famous TED Talk, actually, and Sinek described basically a phenomenon where we communicate what we do badly. We do it in a bad format, and so he gave us a better one, and it starts like this. Now think about this. When somebody asks you, if you're at a meeting or you're at a commission hearing or something like that, and you're out there, you're at a bar or wherever, and people say, so what is it you do? Tell me what you do. We almost always start with what? Here's what I do. I'm an engineer, and I work for this agency, and this is what I do. And you go into the details of that. So for instance, I'm a communication specialist, and I work with agencies and government folks to help them communicate better, and all these sorts of things. You start describing that. That's usually the basis of your standard elevator speech. And then if the person pays attention long enough, or at least pretends to, because let's face it, you're usually not paying attention by this point, you get into the how. How do we do that? Oh, well, we deploy some safety countermeasures that help people on curves, or maybe, and they keeps them safer and helps them not run off the road and that kind of thing. We go on for a while about that. If the person is still interested, usually not, then at last we get to why we do what we do. So for instance, if I'm an engineer at a county agency and I say, you know what, I wake up every day and I'm responsible for people's lives on our roads, and I want to make sure that they get home safely at the end of the day. Now, that's a beautiful thing, and that's why we are all here. This is especially true of safety people and safety-minded people. We know that's what we do, and that's why we do it. The problem is, by the time you get to this why phase of things, you completely lost the person. They've moved on in their mind, and we've all had this experience when you're at a meeting and you're standing there and you're eating the donut holes and have your coffee, and you make the mistake of asking this person what they do. 20 minutes later, they're still explaining all the details of everything they do. You've lost interest. You're just being polite. So Sinek says, what if we flip this? What if we do it like this? We start with why. And so what do? Well, I wake up every day and I know that I'm responsible for the safety of the people on our roads. And so I try my best to get them home safely at the end of the day and leave it there. Isn't that a much more engaging and interesting way to start that conversation? You know what's going to happen if you say something like that? Or so, for instance, if I say, I'm a communicator and all that, what do? Well, I help, there's about 90 people will die on the roads today, and I use my communication skills to help it be less tomorrow. Something like that. It's instantly engaging, and people will almost always ask you, well, how do you do that? See, so now you actually have them engaged, and you're moving to this how concentric circle in a natural way. They're asking you for more information. And then after that, then if they're still interested, you can tell them all the details of what you do. But even if you don't, you have engaged that person. You've made what you do much more interesting just by starting with why. I've tried this in my own life. I have had other folks. I did this presentation, was it last week at NACE? We were at the NACE conference, and Scott Davis said, man, I tried this, and it absolutely works. People, he says, I stopped telling them I do all this engineering stuff, and I start saying, I wake up every day to get people home safely on our roads. And he said, people will automatically ask me, well, tell me how you do that. Okay, so this is a great technique for explaining to people what you do, especially safety. Oh, and by the way, like Jamie mentioned, if you have questions along the way, please do go ahead and put them in the chat pod. I'd much rather just answer them on the fly, so our minds are all on this topic while you have your questions. So feel free. Okay, so let's start with why. The next one is visualize. I think we all know this is important, but it's especially hard for you all that are in the technical fields because there is a visual component, but it's hard to capture that and put all that technical stuff that you do into a visual way. So I want to give you an example of one that we did for the Federal Highway Administration. I had this client at the Federal Highway Administration who is on one of the Everyday Counts teams, and it's the Data-Driven Safety Analysis team. And you all may be familiar with this team. They're amazing, and they do all kind of great stuff. But it's a highly technical thing, and so I was tasked, when I got this one, I was tasked to say, tell the story of DDSA. And that's an inherently hard thing to do. And hang on, let me jump off to your questions here. I see a few coming in. How much do you hate construction? Right, okay, see Jamie from Texas, that's a great way to engage that conversation. I've never heard of In the Street, Texas, but I'm interested. Please send me a link. And then Carrie, yes, I do have some examples of safety why statements that will come up here shortly. So here's what we did. They said, okay, we have these local road safety plans that include all this stuff, and we want to explain this to local agencies, but we don't want to give them just some bullet list, and we don't want to give them some dry one-pager. We want to do something that's more visual and engaging to explain how local road safety plans are developed. And as we got talking, we all said, you know what? Do you remember when you used to watch Mr. Rogers at the beginning, and it would float over his little town, and you would see the butcher, and you'd see the florist, and you'd see the bicycle repair shop person. And then you would actually go into that world, and he would go talk to those people, and it was so great. And as we got to talking, we said, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we just visualize a little town and then go through the process of developing a local road safety plan visually? And this is what we came up with. So you can see, there's our little town. It's a little local area. And the signs, the road signs, have all of the steps to go through to develop these local road safety plans with the other stuff, the sub-information there on the signs. We put this out there, and we didn't know if it was going to be too cartoony or what. This was or it continues to be, a big hit. They have printed thousands and thousands of these things. They hand them out at conferences. They give them away in things like this and webinars. and they have just done a great job of explaining the basics of a local road safety plan. And it's a conversation starter. It's been so successful that they asked us to turn this into an animated video, which we did. We just basically animated this infographic as a companion piece to go along with this. It's just been great. Now, I think you can probably all see that if I took the same information and put it in a Word doc and sent that to you, it's just going to be less interesting. It's going to be less engaging. So if you can visualize this technical information, it is almost always more helpful. This is especially true for safety and especially true for technical stuff. So visualize whenever you can. And it's okay to be playful about it. You see here, we have our crash there about halfway down. It's okay to lighten it up a little bit, which I'll get to more when we talk about emotion. So that's starting with why, and then visualizing. Let me move on to how to use analogies. An analogy is basically you have an unfamiliar concept that you're trying to explain, something that's unfamiliar to people that you're talking to. They don't understand it. And I'm sure you all can relate as being practitioners out there, especially if you're talking to elected leaders, to commissions and boards, to the driving public, to people who don't understand the details of what you do. It's really hard to explain that, especially when you're in the safety world, because we tend to not think much about safety until we are unsafe or until some bad thing happens to us. And then we think about it. So using an analogy, you take this unfamiliar concept, the stuff that you do, and then you explain it using a familiar concept, something that's approachable, something I understand, and then you use it to compare to the unfamiliar thing. Again, using our data-driven safety analysis example, it's a highly complex technical type of analysis, but it's very, very effective. But when I was first brought on to help this team communicate, there's a core type of analysis that they do called systemic analysis. And my team lead, Jerry Roche from FHWA, was trying to explain systemic analysis to me, and I just wasn't understanding it. And he was doing his best, and I said, Jerry, I'm just not getting my brain around this. I don't know how to visualize it. I don't know how to really explain it succinctly. And then Jerry hit on something. He said, okay, Kevin, think of it like this. It's like when you go to the doctor, the first thing they're going to do is check your blood pressure. And then they're going to ask for a family history. And they're going to ask you if you smoke. And they're going to check your weight. And if you're overweight, and if you have high blood pressure, and if you have a family history of diabetes, they're looking for these correlations, these risk factors that correlate with disease. And so they will say, do you have diabetes in your family? Yes. Are you overweight? Yes. Is your blood sugar high? Yes. Okay, those are three screaming risk factors that correlate with type 2 diabetes. We know that if you have those, you're at a higher risk of developing this particular disease. And they do the same thing for heart disease and cancer and all the other things that ail us. He said it's like that for roads. If I go out and do a road system and I look at this curve and we've had a bad crash at that curve and we analyze it and we say it's this radii and it has this geometric configuration and it has these factors all around it, well, I can assume that similar locations that have similar risk factors are also in danger of having a serious crash, even if they haven't had one yet. Systemic analysis lets us go out there and find those risk factors and mitigate those situations before the disease hits. And I went, Jerry, the skies parted, and all of a sudden I understood systemic analysis. And that became our analogy for explaining systemic analysis. How healthy is your road system? And we even have a little x-ray of the road, and you have the risk factors labeled out there. This has also been an extremely successful marketing and outreach piece. It's because of this analogy. It takes this technical thing that people maybe aren't familiar with and gives them something very familiar to explain it. So whenever you can, so for instance, in safety, one of the best analogies I've ever heard, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but you've probably heard this as well, is that the number of people who die in the country every year is like 36,000 people or something who die on the roads. I forget whatever the equivalent is in airplane loads, but I've heard people say, what if this many planes fell out of the sky every year and people died? Would we do something about that? Would that be a national emergency? The answer is obviously yes. But because they happen in little onesies and twosies all over our country, it doesn't feel like as big a problem, though it is. That's a great analogy because it instantly puts this visual in your mind like, oh my gosh, if we can't handle it when one plane falls out of the sky, much less 9, 10, 20, 30 every year. So that's just another example of explaining safety especially, but communication generally, using analogies. This is one of my favorites. And again, we were worried that this might be a little bit too playful and cartoony, but it hasn't been. People love it, and they've printed thousands and thousands of these as well. Okay, so the next technique is to simply ask questions. The human brain is wired such that even if I know nothing about what you just asked me, my brain wants to find the answer. We're curious creatures by nature. And so when you're communicating, especially safety, you can ask questions to start conversations in people's minds. I'm going to go with my DDSA example, and you've seen some already. How healthy is your road system? Oh, it's pretty healthy. Really? How do you know it's healthy? Do you have more crashes than you should on your roads? We're going toward zero. How many crashes have you had? Is it really that healthy? See, it pricks your brain and makes you want to find the answers. The one on the bottom right there, are you making the best roadway safety investments? If so, if you say you are, how do you know? What if I were to tell you there's a way you can know? See, and you're already interested. You're already starting to think, oh, well, do I know? This was a webinar announcement we put out, the one on the left there. How safe are your designs? Simply asking questions can engage our brains, even if we don't know especially if we don't know the answers. So this is another little small technique. If you can fold these together, visualize, using analogies, asking questions, start with why. These are things you can mold together to take this technical information, this safety information, and make it more palatable to our brains, to people who maybe don't know exactly what it is that you do or don't see the importance of it as much as you do. Okay, so those are some basic tips. Now, here's another book I want to give you. We had Start With Why by Simon Sinek, Talk Like TED by Carmine Gallo. We're probably all familiar with TED Talks. If you are not and haven't ever seen one, just Google TED Talks. You'll see a billion of them will show up there. Carmine Gallo is a communication consultant, and he was curious. He said, you know, some TED Talks just really take off. I mean, they just get millions and millions of views, and some don't get as many as others. And he said, I wonder what that is. I wonder if there are correlating elements of these talks that make some more successful than others. Because he studied, he said, he took the most successful TED Talks ever, and he looked for those commonalities. And he said it wasn't topic. The topics were all over the board. It wasn't presentation style necessarily. It wasn't gender. It wasn't anything that, but one of the correlating factors, there were a lot of them, so it's a great book to read. One of the correlating factors that he found in every one of those was that they used emotion well and strategically in their talk. Specifically for this presentation, when you're talking about technical stuff or safety things that people don't want to think that much about, sometimes things that are uncomfortable when we're talking safety, what he noticed and what he learned is that the way the human brain works is that if I have something technical that I want to convey to you, that I want you to remember, then have it in your brain, especially some information that might be uncomfortable, maybe we don't want to think about it, a great way to prime your brain to listen to that information is to use emotion. You can tug on their heartstrings. You can make them laugh. The very best presentations you've probably ever seen are ones where the presenter started with a little joke. And you've maybe not even known why that just worked, but it does. Emotion opens our brain to more technical information. So anytime you can, it can be any emotion, but if you can make an emotional appeal, if you can somehow draw emotion out of people, then they are going to be more susceptible and more interested and more open to the technical information that you want to give them. So that is one thing that I think we don't maybe use enough in the technical fields. We're maybe a little afraid to be emotional, to crack a joke, to pull on the heartstrings. But what the next example I want to show you is, to me, is just an outstanding example of bringing together many of these quick tips in a very short, I think it's 48-second video that captures all of these, and it was done by Clackamas County, Oregon. And there in the county, they are trying to get people to slow down around curves. I know we're probably all trying to do that. But they wanted to get people's attention and make them think next time they went around a curve how dangerous it is to go around it too fast. And they put together this video. Now, we tried to make this video behave itself and play inside Adobe Connect, but it just wouldn't. It just didn't want to. Adobe Connect is not doing that. So here's what we're going to do, so you have a chance to watch this video. You see the link right there? The link is also in your chat pod. I want to take 2 minutes. The video is 48 seconds long. Take 2 minutes, and all of you who can, click the link and watch the video, and then come back over here, and I want to break this video down. Now, I understand that those of you who are in groups in conference rooms, it might not be easy or feasible for you to jump off to YouTube right now, but that's okay. You have the link. You can check it out later, and then after we come back, I'm going to break this video down using screenshots, and so you will be able to see what happens in the video, even if you can't jump off. So if you would, I'm going to start a clock for about 2 minutes. Jump off and watch this video. I think you'll love it. Okay, it looks like quite a few of you have seen it. And like I said, if you haven't, that you have the link and you can go check it out for yourself. A couple of good questions in there I want to address right off the bat is that somebody mentioned that the engineer at the end seemed maybe a little less dynamic than you would expect. That is the county engineer for Clackamas County, Oregon. And the story behind this video was that he knew he needed to do a better job communicating. He's an engineer. He doesn't come by that naturally. And so it was a very big deal for him to be in the video at all. And he was doing his best to, to play up that part. But it was a big jump for him to be in the video. So but he's an actual engineer. So no actors. He was not an actor. That's how he is. And then, so Carrie asked the question, is the video connected to driving enough? I think so, and here's why I think that, is that, and I think I can explain that a little bit better when we get to the sales funnel, but remember who this is for. This is just for people that are out there driving on the road, and to me, what they need is a visual of going around a curve and all of that stuff spilling out. And all of that stuff, Scott says my voice is echoing. Is that for everybody or? Okay. Echo. Okay. Okay, looks like we're okay. I'm going to keep going, and maybe some of you that have something on your end, maybe, but I'll keep going. Okay,
so
I think it's good.
We'll remind everyone just real quick that if you did open these speakers on your computer and you're listening by phone, make sure that you mute your computer speakers again. And the same thing, Kevin, if you opened your computer speakers, just make sure you mute those, please.
Okay. And so I like the visual of just going around a curve, all that stuff spilling out. It's just enough to have that picture in your brain next time you approach a curve, I think. So I really like it. But I'd like to. So let me break this down for you a little bit and show you what, again, in my opinion, how this little video used quite a few of these marketing tips that I've just given you. So it's obviously an analogy, right? We're going to the grocery store, we're going around a curve. There's emotion there. One of my favorite parts of that video is the super dramatic music that they use, the big operatic, scary music. And her going in this mundane situation and the people turning around slow-mo, it's hilarious to me. And so it pulls out that emotional, and it makes you want to keep watching it. Also visualizing, of course, going around a curve, the eggs falling out, things breaking. It's a very subtle way of saying, yeah, it can be dangerous. Bad things happen when you speed around curves. And then Joe at the end asked a question. He says, you wouldn't do this in the grocery store. Why are you doing this on curves? And so he finishes it with a question. I think it's a really nice little marketing piece. I wish I had thought of it, frankly. So that's one of my favorite examples. And also it's transportation, it's safety, it's all the things that you all work in every day. So I think that's a nice example of all of these coming together, all these tips. Okay, I have a few bonus tips that I want to give you, and then we're going to take I think a poll break or a question break. This is from my experience in communication. Be helpful, not snarky. It's really, really hard because when we're trying so hard to communicate and we believe in what it is we're working on, and we want other people to understand it so badly that if they aren't getting it or they don't want to hear it, it can be frustrating. And it's very easy to fall into to be a little snarky. So for instance, if I say, oh, I'd really like you to come to this webinar on curves, or I would like you to consider slowing down around curves, or whatever it is, it's very easy to say something like, well, I guess you just don't care if people get home safely. I guess you just, you know what, I guess you just want to take your life in your hands and everybody's children, and you can get like that. It's a tone thing. So be careful about that. It's a hard thing, but we have to keep our tone the right way. And nothing alienates people more than sarcasm and snarkiness. The next thing is that marketing is an ongoing conversation. And that's coupled with the next one, that there is no one marketing thing. There's no silver bullet in marketing and communication. It is an ongoing, so for instance, a lot of times we'll have a big push. We'll do something, I think we just came out of Work Zone Safety Week, right? That's a big push we do every year. And that's fine. You need those big blasts. You need to have that big moment where people pay attention to you. But then a lot of times the mistake is that we quit. And frankly, I'm more and more starting to believe that most communication efforts don't fail because they weren't creative, and they don't fail because they had bad messaging. They fail because they didn't go long enough. I don't think we keep the conversation going long enough. You have to then keep dripping. We call it a blast drip strategy. You blast it out, and then you drip, 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 drip. And you never stop talking to them. What I always ask audiences, I say, why do Disney World and Coca-Cola and Nike and McDonald's continue to advertise to us? Why do I keep seeing McDonald's billboards? I know McDonald's is out there. I'm a Floridian. I go to Disney World a lot. I know Disney World. It's on my radar. Why do I have to keep seeing advertising? Because the biggest brands in the world know you never ever stop talking to your target audiences, or you can possibly lose them. So you must do the same thing. You get your messages, and then you just never, ever stop keeping those messages out there. And there is no one thing. When I used to work for an advertising firm, and they would say things like, okay, clients would come in, I can't spend $1 million. I want to know just what's the one thing I have to do to get customers, and I'll just put all my money on that. Well, I don't have an answer for that. There's no one thing. And the example I use for this is one of my favorite examples is McDonald's all-day breakfast. We all know all-day breakfast. Maybe you can tell I like McDonald's. These are all my examples. But all-day breakfast, how long did it take the world to know that McDonald's was doing all-day breakfast? And I'm going to guess it was about 5 seconds when they launched that campaign. But think back in your mind to that campaign. How many different places you saw all-day breakfast? You probably saw a billboard. You probably saw it on social media, maybe on television. You might have heard something on the radio. Certainly if you drove by a McDonald's, they had it on the window clings, they had it on the menus. It was everywhere. It's called integrated marketing communication. There is no one thing. You have to do lots of things, every channel you have at your disposal. And it's easy to say, well, I'm not McDonald's. We don't have that kind of budget. We don't have those kinds of channels. And that's absolutely true. But it doesn't mean you don't have options. Social media costs you nothing but time. Events, when we go to events, meetings, webinars, T-shirts, for goodness sake. If you have to make T-shirts and pass them around with your key messages on them. As public agencies, you have a certain right to the public airwaves for public service announcements. They give you free airtime. There are lots of ways you can keep these messages out there in lots of different channels, just like the big brands do. So ongoing conversation, and do as many channels as you can. Those are my bonus tips. And Jamie, I think we are at a...
We are.
Yeah.
Yep, we're at a question break. So we're going to go ahead, and if anyone has any questions for Kevin, you can put those in the chat pod at this time. I am going to move us over to another poll question for y'all. That chat pod still is on the left-hand side, you'll see. So the questions we have for you are, which of the following is not one of the 5 marketing tips discussed? Start with why, visualize, use analogies, ask questions, get emotional, focus on one marketing channel at a time, I don't know or I don't remember. And then the second one is, emotional appeals are ineffective when used with factual appeals, true or false, or I don't know, I don't remember. And we'll just give you guys a couple seconds to fill these out. All right, just another second or two if everyone wants to finish filling out the polls. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and end these and display the results for you. And Kevin, at this time, you should be able to see the results.
Yep, I do. It looks like everyone, or almost everyone, passed, did very well. Very good, everyone. Yeah, so one of the 5 marketing tips is not focus on one marketing channel at a time. Obviously, integrated marketing communication. And emotional appeals, yes, they do work better with factual appeals. And so the answer to that question is false. So well done, everybody.
Okay, perfect. And you have a couple of questions coming in for you on the chat pod. The first one is that a lot of agencies have a rotating cycle of safety messages, such as work zone, drunk driving, speeding. And do you think that this is effective?
I think it can be effective. I think people get confused. In other words, if I'm a driver, it's hard for people to have multiple similar messages in their brain at the same time. Okay? So if I'm thinking about the work zone, it's hard for me to also be thinking about the drunk driver. That said, if you keep them separate enough, in other words, you would never put those same messages in the same campaign. So they must be, our brain, human beings would like to categorize things. We have compartments in our brain. And so if you can focus on that one compartment, then you have a better chance of it, but you never want to put all of those things in one big fell swoop. One of the mistakes I see a lot in marketing is that there's a tendency to want to make every marketing piece you put out there say every message to everyone that you've ever need to talk to. That's always a mistake. That's always a mistake. So you must focus down. People can only take one thing at a time in their mind. That said, theme months like Work Zone Safety Month, as long as you focus on that month and you don't have any big, so if you're doing drunk driving or you're doing work zone safety, you're not also talking about speeding or also talking about curves. Try your very best to focus, focus, focus. It's the hardest thing to do in communication. It's the least well done thing in communication. So back to the all-day breakfast, my obsession with McDonald's. All-day breakfast, that's the message, right? It wasn't all-day breakfast, oh, and hey, we also have a new Big Mac. That's all they said, all-day breakfast, and they said it over and over and over and over again. I hope that answers your question.
Perfect. And the next question that came in for you is, did the video, the one from Clackamas County, also get airtime on TV?
I don't know that for sure, but I'm going to guess no, only because it was 48 seconds. And if you're putting something on TV, it's either got to be 30 seconds or a minute. So I'm going to guess this was a social media campaign, largely.
Okay. And the PowerPoint is back up now, Kevin, if you would like to move on to the next section. Again, everyone, please feel free to put questions in at any time, and we will have 2 more question and answer breaks as well.
Okay, good. So this next section, teasers. I'm going to explain what I mean by that, but really what it boils down to, this is on the personal level. When you're talking to folks, and I know in every, all these trainings that we take, they all say, you got to have an elevator speech. You got to have the elevator speech. I read this great book by Stephanie Palmer called Good in a Room. It's one of the better business books I've ever read, one of the better communication books. And her whole premise is that the elevator speech, the whole idea of it is flawed. That it's not a bad idea to have something to say about what you do or your agency or your work. It's just that we deploy it terribly badly. And I absolutely agree. Stephanie Palmer worked for MGM Studios for about 6 years. And she said her job was to listen to and vet pitches for movie scripts. So I'd be a script writer or whatever, and I'd come into Stephanie Palmer at MGM, and I'd make my pitch, and I'd try and sell my script, my story idea. And then they would take it to executives, and they would decide whether they were going to fund this story or not. And what she noticed, what really stood out to her, was there were lots of really, really good stories that she thought would make amazing movies, but they never got funded because the person did a bad job of explaining, of pitching that story. And the industry term for that is being good in a room. When you get in the room with an important person, can you close the deal? Can you explain your proposal to them in a way that makes them want to take it? And she said most people cannot do that. And then what she said was there's lots of really, really bad ideas that got made into movies because they were better able to pitch their idea in the room with the decision maker. They were good in a room. Now, we probably have all seen movies where we walked out and went, who in their right mind ever decided to spend money on that piece of garbage? Well, that's why, is because the person pitching did a good job. And she explains in that book how to be good in a room. So I highly recommend that text to everybody. But to this point of the elevator speech, she said it's a bad idea. You should think like movie makers and make teasers instead of an elevator speech. And we've all seen teasers, right, on your social media feed or whatever. A new movie comes out, or we saw this if you're a Game of Thrones fan. You saw the teasers leaking out, oh my gosh, the first teaser, and then we all freak out. And then they have one that's a little bit longer, and they tease a little bit more, and we all freak out again. And they keep us interested. And so she said that's how you should think about your elevator speech and the way you talk to people. So what I want to do here, this graphic we have on here is called the sales funnel. You may have heard that term. It's something that I think about all the time with communication. And you may not think you're in sales. Don't think of it necessarily as selling stuff, but you're all in the business of selling ideas. We all are. And so understanding how the human brain works, how we actually make decisions, can really, really help you when it comes to communicating. So, and then I'm going to come back to how the teaser works with this. The top level of the sales funnel is awareness. I had an old boss one time that used to say, anytime someone encounters a new brand or a new idea or a new organization or a new agency, we all ask ourselves one question. And that question is, have I heard of them before? And the way you know that's absolutely true is if I come to you and say, hey, I went to this great restaurant last night. Oh my gosh, you have got to go to it. And the person will say, what's the name? And I'll say the name. And they go, oh yeah, I heard of that before. Right? It's the question we all ask ourselves. It's the awareness step. And there's something about our brains that if we've even heard about this organization or restaurant or whatever, even if we don't know why or where or anything about it, it automatically has more credibility with us just because we've heard of it. You have to get on people's radar before you can get them to actually take action. This is a big mistake. This is why the elevator speech fails. The next step is awareness and interest. Think about starting with why. What is it you do? Oh, well, you know what? I wake up every day and I save lives on the road. Whoa. Well, how do you do that? See, that's an interest question. That shows I'm interested. Tell me more. And you move them one more step down the sales funnel. The next step is desire. Once they learn about what you do, then it starts to bring a desire. Oh, I want to eat at that restaurant. I think I will go. And you say, okay, here's the address, and here's where it is, and here's their opening times, and hey, you should try this particular dish, and the dessert there was awesome. Oh my gosh, I have got to go try this. And that is when we take action. And this is an iron rule. They call it a decision sequencing model. This is one of the fancy terms they taught me in graduate school. Decision sequencing model. Awareness, interest, desire, and action. This is how we make all of our decisions. And if you think about how you make all of certainly your significant buying decisions, you went through this step. You never buy from an organization you've never heard of. We just don't do that. It's not the way it works. Well, here's how this works with your teaser and with your elevator speech, is that most elevator speeches are geared right here, right? We want them to take action right now. The first time we ever met, we got to tell them everything about us, and we want you to be involved, and we want you to come to our event. No, they're not going to do that. It's not how we operate. I don't even know who you are. So the elevator speech or the teaser shouldn't be at the action level. It belongs at the awareness level. That's what it is for. And so you have to rethink how you present when you're talking to someone. And Stephanie Palmer goes through these three great ways to write your own teaser for what it is you do. She calls them startling statistics, purposely non-specific phrases, which is my favorite, and then long-term benefits. And Carrie, this is going to get to your earlier question about a safety why message, because there's a couple of good ones in here. And by the way, I do see your questions over here about measuring safety campaigns and that sort of stuff. I'm gonna come to that, and I want to answer that as best I can. But if I somehow forget, somebody please remind me, or Jamie jump in and remind me to answer that question. Startling statistics, purposely non-specific phrases, and long-term benefits. You can use these three to write a teaser for what it is that you do that is way more interesting than an elevator speech. So let me give you mine. Startling statistics. About 80 people will die on the road today. My job is to help it be fewer tomorrow. Now, you asked me what I did, and I told you that, you can't say you wouldn't at least be a little bit interested. I've moved you from attention down to interest already in one statement. My purposely non-specific phrase is, I'm a transportation translator. I sometimes feel like that. It's my job to take technical information and translate it into language that non-technical people can understand. So I'm a transportation translator. Well, what does that mean? How do you do that? Glad you asked. And now we're having a conversation. And then my long-term benefits. I use communication to help you get home safely at the end of the day. So you see I have my why in there. I also am putting this in a form of a teaser. So now I've pricked their interest. Here's a couple that we've done at previous when I've done this presentation before. Cornell Robertson from Franklin County, Ohio, had one of the best I've ever heard. I went around the room and I had people, He called himself an engineer, which to me is genius. I'm an engineer. I battle for safe and efficient movement of people and goods from place to place in my county. This next one was one that we, at the summit back in December, there's an engineer from Alabama. He said, I'm like a defensive back. Think of me as a defensive back for the highway system. I don't let crashes get through. Great analogy, right? You see it in your mind. It's my job to protect people on the roads like a defensive back. And if any of you from the South, you know football is a religion down here, that resonates with people in Alabama. Okay. Hook 'em. Exactly, in Texas. Of course, hook 'em. I can tell that Jamie in Texas is going to be good at this. Okay. So here's what I want to do. And then I'm going to come back and answer this measurement question. Here's what I want to do. Types of teasers. Here are the examples. I want you to take, I don't know, let's take 5 minutes. Let's take until, well, 1 o'clock Central where I am, 5 minutes. And try to use one of these to write your own teaser. Just take 5 minutes. Don't overthink it. Take a startling statistic, a purposely non-specific phrase, or a long-term benefit, and then write one of your own. Take the next 5 minutes. And then when you get one, please put it in the chat pod, and let's see what you come up with. And then when we come back, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to talk to that question about measuring success. And stop all the football talk. I opened up the can of worms with football. All right, so 5 minutes. about one more minute. These are really good.
And for everyone listening, what we'll do is we'll pull these out of the chat pod and put them into a Word document and post them along with the archived version of this webinar so that you can have access to all of these as well.
Isn't it more fun than writing an elevator speech? It's just inherently more user-friendly. Okay, so I'm sure you all have been reading each other's as they came in, and they're outstanding. You can play with these others. I see quite a few use startling statistics because the safety folks, we have startling statistics, no doubt about it. I agree with Cameron. I saw Carrie's about helping you celebrate your next birthday. That's a striking one. So good job, everybody. This is just one quick little exercise. Imagine what if you just sat down and thought about this a little bit longer, what you could do. Also, too, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that I think it was Janet mentioned something. Yeah, about tweaking all of this stuff for technology transfer program. I'd actually like to follow up with you offline on that one because I do a lot of work with the Center for Accelerating Innovation and the Everyday Accounts program and technology transfer and innovation deployment and all that. And we can talk at length about that. So you'll have my email address, so please email me after this and we'll talk it out. I'm a decision coach. Now that's an analogy that I like a lot. These people in Oregon. Okay. So very good, everybody. Jamie, do we have a break now? Another?
We do. We have another poll question for everyone. And again, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat pod, and we will go back up to the two that were asked prior to the teasers. This poll question for you is, where should a teaser be used in the sales funnel? Attention, interest, desire, action, none of the above, or I don't know, I don't remember. So we'll give everyone a few seconds to do that. And Kevin, I'm going to scroll back up in the chat pod to those questions and ask you one of them while everyone's answering.
Sure. Oh, measurement. Jamie, you want me to talk about measurement?
Yes, so it was, how effective are social media campaigns for DOTs? Does it really reach the community? And then along that same one, how do we measure the success of that market reach for a safety message?
Okay, outstanding question. It's time for real talk. State DOTs typically, their social media feeds are full of traffic information. It's what drivers want to know, right? They want to know the latest. Is there going to be a snowstorm? Is the road going to be closed? I have never, I take that back. It's rare that you're going to see tons of engagement with the driving public. That said, through the social media, there are two things you can do. Remember the sales funnel. Remember awareness. You just want to get into their mind a little bit to make them think a little bit more. So I'm not saying don't do it. You should absolutely, because social media is free. There's no reason not to. But here's a little technique that you can do to focus that down maybe a little bit more. Is in your communities, we all know there are Facebook groups, there are other advocacy groups, there are lots of other partners out there that have these same messages and have audiences that are much closer to their social media feeds than, say, a DOT. I'm just going to go to FDOT and I want to know what the hurricane is doing, what the road's like. But there may be some other group where I can send them content. We do this a lot at the Federal Highway Administration because it's even worse for the feds. People don't go to our social media pages to find the stuff really we want them to know. But you can partner with those who do. And then, so if you have this cool video, like they did in Clackamas County, don't just put it in the DOT feed, you should, but also send it to those other groups and let them start to share it around. And then you will have a little bit more reach. You'll also have much better contact with the people who matter to you. It takes a little more work, but to me, if I'm managing a social media feed, then I want free content if you give me those messages, especially from a reputable agency. So that's one technique that we've used that has done a little bit better. Measuring marketing. Now, social media, you can measure it more because you do get the analytics and you know what's going on back there. Marketing generally, especially for government agencies, is incredibly hard to measure. I'm not going to lie to you. I haven't found an amazing way to get hard numbers. Now, when I was working for an ad agency, we could. We could measure sales. You can measure, did you do something on a website I wanted you to do? Did you fill out a form? Did you click a button? Did you come to an event? I can send out surveys. All of that is hard to do for government agencies. And it may not be that bad for yours, but it's really hard, certainly for the feds, and I would imagine the DOTs as well. And so a lot of the stuff that you do is going to have to be qualitative. I wish I had a better answer for you. I just don't. In social media, you can measure the engagement. That's a quantitative thing. You can measure shares and comments and that sort of thing. If you have an event, you can measure attendance at the event. You can measure things like handouts that people take, inquiries that they make after they're done. All of those things, if you do a follow-up survey, that's why we're doing one today. So there are ways you can capture that stuff. I would just, as honest as I can be, working with government agencies, it's hard to get people to measure well. And sometimes they just don't give you the right tools. So I'm sorry, I wish I had a better answer on that one. By the way, if you find a better answer, please let me know, because I'd like to know it. Okay.
And Kevin, at this time, I've closed the poll for you and broadcast those results, so you can address that as well, please.
Okay, good. So most of you, 60% or so, got the answer right. It's at the attention level. You want to tease them when they don't know much about you. Just how do I introduce myself to you in an interesting, engaging way at the attention level? So that's the correct answer.
Okay, and just to let everyone know, we do have one question and answer period left, but again, make sure that you go ahead and use that chat pod at any time, and Kevin will answer the questions you might have left.
All right, Jeffrey, you got me on a typo, attention or awareness. Yes, I'm sorry. I had those two words used interchangeably because we do use them interchangeably. Attention step and the awareness step are the same thing. So I apologize for that. I will correct that in this presentation. Good eye, thank you. Okay, so the last section is a communication brief. I want to introduce you to this amazing, amazing tool that is used by the biggest brands on earth and is so simple to use, but will focus your communication efforts so well if you will be disciplined enough to use it. It's deceptively simple, but it is amazing. It is a set of questions, the communication brief. It's a one-page tool. If you fill this out, you will have basically a little plan for your communication efforts, certainly a specific campaign. Biggest brands on earth use this, and when I explain it to you, you could probably go back and reverse engineer national campaigns that you've seen. I do this with my students all the time, and it's eye-opening to see, oh my gosh, you can literally dissect the thinking that came into that campaign. Communication brief provides clarity and consistent messaging, which are two of the hardest things to do in communication. And you should use one of these for all of your communication efforts. Write a separate one for each of your distinct efforts. If you're doing a campaign on wearing seat belts, okay, do a communication brief just on that. And here's how it goes. Oh, by the way, you can download it. It's in the handout thing there. So grab it, please, and use it. First question, why are we communicating? That seems like a pretty simple thing, but really think about it hard. Why are we communicating? So let's use the example of seatbelts. A lot of times people say, we want people to think about using their seatbelts. Well, no, that's not exactly why we're communicating. We want them to put their seatbelt on every time they get in the car. So we have a specific action that we are going for. Now, what that does, what this question does, is it filters out everything else that you could possibly communicate about. Remember I said a big trap that some folks fall into is they want every marketing piece to say everything to everyone. This is not how it works. If we're talking about clicking your seatbelt when you get in your car, that's all we are talking about with this campaign and everything that goes into it. without exception, should only focus on that one behavior, okay? It can't be buckle up and think about the car seat, buckle up and slow down around the curve. No. Focus, focus, focus. That's the first question. Next question, to whom are we talking? This is a little one of mine that I really want to impress upon you. The answer to that question is never, ever, ever the general public. The general public is not an audience. That's a fallacy. You're never talking to everyone. You're always talking to someone specific. So if we're talking about, and the more specific you can get, the more effective your communication will be. If I have data that says 18 to 25-year-olds are less likely to click their seatbelt than moms and dads in their, say, mid-30s, then I focus on that little segment. I'm talking to those people. You're not talking to the general public because 8-year-olds can't drive. You're not talking to people who can't drive. You have to talk to specific groups of people for each of your campaigns. So when you hear, oh, we're talking to the general public, get in your brain to say, that's not quite good enough. We have to define our audience closer than that. And the more specific you get with your audience, the easier your messaging gets. Now, what do they currently think? You need to know that about this audience. Okay, so we're talking to 18 to 24-year-olds who don't wear their seatbelts. What do they currently think? Maybe they don't think at all about their seatbelt. Maybe they think they're indestructible and they aren't going to get into a crash that requires a seatbelt. I've even heard some people say, oh, you know what? I knew this guy who rolled his truck over in a ditch and he didn't have his seatbelt on. And if he had his seatbelt on, that thing would have crushed him and killed him. Okay. And so they think that you should not wear your seatbelt because it's safer for some perverse way. Well, you need to know that, what they think. Because if you don't know what they're thinking now, then the next question is, what would we like them to think? You might be deluding yourself. You might be thinking, they love us and they're listening to our messages. Well, if they actually aren't, then what would we like them to think? We'd like them to think that if you don't put your seatbelt on, you're taking your life in your hand. If you put your seatbelt on, you're setting yourself up for a great life that you get to live. Okay, you can see how the messaging comes out of this. So what do they currently think about us? This takes research. Good question. How can I find out what they think? This is where if you can, so for instance, if you're doing a seatbelt campaign, Google this, and even though your agency may not be able to do the research behind this or the surveys that are required, I guarantee others have. Private firms, agencies have done this. See what you can glean, because 18 to 24-year-olds, as we know, using my example, they think pretty much the same way across the country. So see if others have this data out there. The other thing is, if you're at a local agency especially, like I live in Bay County, Florida, we're a rural county, we can go to the high schools and walk in there and have a discussion with them about wearing their seatbelts, find out what they think. It's a little focus group. One of my favorite advertising heroes is David Ogilvy, and he said, I can learn more about my target market with one person in an elevator in 5 minutes than I sometimes can with all the research methods in the world. So just talk to people and listen to what they say, and don't assume that you know what they think. And then boil it down. What is the single most persuasive idea we can convey? Because that's going to be the core message of your campaign. My undergraduate degree is in theology, of all things, and I had this professor who was really great with sermon delivery and presentation delivery, and he called it a sermon in a sentence. He said, if you can't boil down your entire message to one sentence of 15 words or less, you don't know it well enough to deliver it. It's extremely hard to do, but once you do, you get that nugget. What are we trying to persuade them to do? That becomes the core of your campaign. And then why should they believe it? Why should they trust us on this? And so you have to think about credibility issues. Do they know who we are? Are we on their radar? And then last, are there any creative guidelines? In other words, is there a brand we're using? Does your DOT or your agency have a brand? I've given this presentation in, 3 or 4 places now, but the information stays the same, but for each one I put it into a different template. This is the template for the National Center for Rural Road Safety. When I did it for NACE, I put it in the NACE template. Those are all little creative things that play on the human brain that build credibility. consistent branding, and creative guidelines, which I could talk about all day, but that's a different webinar. So this is the communication brief. If you answer these questions honestly and put thought into it, I think you can probably already tell how your communications are going to be more focused, they're going to be more pointed at target audiences, and they're almost always going to be more effective. Okay, so that's the communication brief tool. Take that right out of the handouts, and please use it and let me know how it works for you. I think that was my last little segment. Jamie, you have another section here?
That is, and so we do have some questions coming in already in the chat pod, but please put any remaining questions you might have in there, and we'll address those in just a second. Our last question for you all is, a communications brief is used to guide all brand communications and advertising promotional efforts as an external document, as a list of action items, all of the above, none of the above, I don't know, or I don't remember. So we'll give everyone a few seconds to fill that out. And in the meantime, Kevin, the next question for you is, how do you find out what a group currently thinks without resources to run surveys?
It's called shoe leather marketing. And it's a little bit about what I was talking about before. Depending on where you are, again, using my example, if you don't have money to do this stuff, you're going to have to put in labor to do this stuff. You can Google. You can find amazing information and data out there that might correlate with your particular situation, what you're trying to do. Another one is get out there, go to meetings, go to the public meetings, talk to people. Let them yell at you in the hallway. You know how this goes. If you're in a county agency, if you're a local agency, they can't wait to tell you what they think of you. Sometimes it's going to be great. Sometimes it's not. But you need to know if they don't like you, or they don't like what's going on, or they don't like this particular issue. You need to know that so you can craft your messages to counteract that and to persuade them otherwise. And so you're going to have to use some shoe leather. Get out there and talk to the people in your community and ask them what they think about these issues. And you will be surprised at, well, you probably won't be surprised, especially you all in the local agencies. They will tell you exactly what they think. Now, one thing about that, one other little side thing about that is be careful about, there's a bias there because it's like when people do polls, there's a self-selection process that goes on. I don't want to talk to the pollster. Some people just wait all day. They love that stuff, and they want to talk to the pollster. That said, you can get some really good information. Look for correlations. If you start seeing you heard the same thing at the waffle shop that you heard at the high school, that you heard at the public meeting, that you heard at the commission meeting, you might have something there. I hope that answers your question.
So you just talked a little bit about the shoe leather, and you also mentioned about surveys, but are there any other tips or tricks you use to find out what people think?
I listen. We like to talk more than we listen as we go out in our everyday life. Become an active listener for those kinds of things. Ask people questions. Be curious. You're going to have to do a lot of this anecdotally. If you don't have the budget or your agency or organization doesn't allow you to go out and mine this kind of thing, you're going to have to simply talk to people and listen to what they're saying. That coupled with the online research that I mentioned, you can start to find correlations between that. This is actually something that gets easier the smaller agency you have, because as you know the people in your communities. But there's no clean thing that I can tell you. If you don't have money or staff to go do this, that's going to be your best bet. But a lot of times, to me, frankly, so like I told you I work for CAI. We do EDC News and Innovator, the Innovator magazine and the EDC News email. I track all that stuff, and I know if people are opening and that sort of stuff, but there's nothing more valuable than talking to someone who actually is a subscriber and says, oh yeah, I get it every time, and I open it up and I look at this and I don't look at that. And one interaction with that person can probably can represent others who are having the same successes and challenges with our communication.
Okay. Someone put into the chat pod as well to listen with intention, and that's a great quote as well. Kevin, at this point, I have ended the poll and broadcast those results, so I'll have you address that first, and then we'll ask you that last question that's sitting in the chat pod for you.
Okay. So we're kind of evenly split between the first answer, that a communication brief is used to guide all brand communications, and then there were quite a few of you that put all of the above. The answer is actually the first one. It's a guide to guide all brand communications, and here's why it's not all of the above. Is that this is not an external document. The communication brief is something that you will do with you and your team. You'll sit around and you'll talk this thing out. This is the little core document that helps consolidate your thinking. So it's an internal document. The other thing is that it doesn't give you the actions just yet. Remember, this is a messaging and thinking document. You're going to put in there who we're talking to. We're going to have our target audiences. We're going to have some brand guidance. But the next step after you get your communication brief is to develop your tactics. What are we going to do to fulfill this communication brief? The reason I make that distinction is because a very, very common mistake in communication is to get busy doing something before you've done the right thinking. So they'll come to you and say, hey, we need to go do a social media campaign. We need to have an event. We need to do a PSA. And you haven't actually, okay, well, who are we talking to? What do they even think about us? No, we just got to get busy. We've got to have a PSA. They have a PSA. We need a PSA. Don't do that. Don't fall into that trap. Do the thinking first, and then what we do, the list of action items, comes out of that. So I hope that helps clarify.
The last question that's in the chat pod for you is, do you have short tips on how to get people to be good in a room?
Okay, I do. I read this book. I'm telling you all, look at my reading list, but if you're going to choose one, please choose that one. It is an amazing communication book. But here are a couple, because I'm also a public speaking professor, and a lot of this comes down to you know your stuff really well, but you're deathly afraid of speaking in front of people, like most human beings are, okay? I could do a whole other webinar and love to, because I love teaching public speaking, but let me give you two that will help you immediately, okay? One is show up super early to whatever meeting that you're going to be in and actually stand in the room where you're going, if they'll let you, and they usually will, stand in the room where you're going to be doing the talk, where you're going to be giving your pitch. There are two things that happen with that. The first one is stand in that room and just get nervous, because you're going to get nervous. You're going to have that adrenaline hit you. You're going to get nervous. Here's the thing, though, is that the physiology behind the fight or flight reflex, which is what you're feeling, the physiology behind that is you can't have two of those of the same extremity within the same time period. And here's what that means. You're going to go into that room, stand there alone, get really nervous, and let the adrenaline hit you. Then what's going to happen is that adrenaline is going to start to work its way out of your body, and your body simply cannot have that extreme a response for a number of hours. So if you're there an hour early, you go there, you have your experience, and then my second tip is take a walk. Okay? Take a walk and just get out around the building, take a walk around the block, let the adrenaline start to work its way out of your body. Then when you come back in to actually do your presentation, you will be nervous. You're going to be nervous, that's okay, but you can't physically be as nervous as you were the first time. It's just physically impossible. You can't do it. If you come in the day before and then you go in one day later, you can be. But if you come in an hour early, you just can't be. So get there early. The second thing that will help you do is visualize. Visualizing actually works. We know that if a college student or a student takes a test in the same room where that student learned the information, that student will almost always do better than students who take it in a different room. Our brains if we visualize the room we're standing in, you'll do a little bit better. If you get there early, let the adrenaline hit, and then take a walk, your body will be more on your side instead of fighting against you. So that's just two quick little tips that I hope are helpful. But yeah, I can do a whole thing on public speaking. It's an incredibly valuable skill.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you for taking the time to do this webinar today. We really do appreciate it, and I think I know I learned a lot, and I hope that the rest of our attendees did as well.
Good. I hope they did. I had a blast. Thank you all.
In today's webinar, you guys have learned how to describe several practical tips for better communication, to define the sales funnel and how it works in communication, to write 3 teasers to describe your work with others, and to use a communication brief to plan communication activities. Our upcoming webinars, we are still working on our May 2019 webinar, but we do intend to have one towards the end of the month. It will be at the same time frame. I also do want to remind you that every single one of our webinars that we've done, over 40 of them in the last 3.5 years, have been recorded and are available on our website. You are eligible for CEUs and certificates of completion for completing and answering the surveys that are attached to those streaming videos. When I do post this one to our website, I will also make sure that I do post all of those example teasers that you guys came up with today, so you can get to those as well. And if you have any additional questions for Kevin, his email address is now showing on the screen. And then you can also contact the National Center for Rural Road Safety if you need help. The 800 number will ring directly to my cell phone, and that is also an email address and a website that you can get additional information for. Janet, your question that's in the chat pod about the email list, if you go right to our website, ruralsafetycenter.org, on the home page you can sign up for our distribution list, and that will send you all of the invitations for our webinars. You can also visit our training page, and there is a registration page underneath that one that will list all of our webinars as they come up, and then the archived page is also under that one as well, which shows you all of the recordings. And lastly, there's an in-person trainings page as well, which tells you all of the trainings that we have that we can come on site and do as part of the Safety Center. So again, thank you all for attending today, and Kevin, thank you so much for presenting. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anytime.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.